My name is Rachel Nygaard. I work for Buncombe County in the Office of the County Manager as Director of Strategic Partnerships. I oversee the grant funding, the annual grant funding, which we have renamed this year to Strategic Partnership Grant Funding. Those of you that have had grants from the county in the past, it has been called community funding or community grants. And part of that renaming was a strategic alignment with the City of Asheville, who we're co-hosting the grant writing workshop with today. We changed our timelines, which were similar but kind of different. We changed our grant application questions, which were similar but kind of different, to remove those barriers and align between the two municipalities who are funding a lot of the same organizations, working on a lot of the same goals, so that our decision-making bodies, the Board of Commissioners for the county, the council for the city, have information about what applications are coming forward and what programs are doing in the community.
Good morning. I'm Heather Dillashaw. I'm the Community Development Director for the city. I do just have to say that regardless of what happens in Washington, we are still working together and open. So pretty proud of that today, that we're standing here together and continuing to work together to do good work. So this, and Rachel has a different introduction because, as you know, for city funding, you're required to be here. So thank you for coming on Saturday. I know that that's hard for some of you, and I know that makes it easier for others of you. So we are glad you're here. We do want to have you introduce yourselves and your organizations very quickly. I do want to say that Erica is going to post it. This is Erica Germer. She's also with the city. Yeah. Erica's also with the city, and we work together. And Erica is, as many of you know, project manages many of our strategic partnership funding grants and works with many of you frequently. So she's going to pass out Post-it notes, and I encourage you, as Rachel and I go through this presentation, that you write down the questions that you have once so you don't forget them, and then we can collect them. And as Rachel said, we can ask them collectively so that everybody benefits both from the question and from the answer. Sometimes we don't know the questions that we would benefit from until we hear somebody else ask it. So this is a collective wisdom and all the amazing brain power in this room. I think it'll be a good morning. So if let's start back here and let's go just real quickly. I know it's a big room, but I know that you don't all know each other, and I certainly don't know all of you as either. So name and organization, and then we'll get going on the presentation.
The Strategic Partnership Grant Funding is the grant funding that's directed by our elected boards. Here's the Board of Commissioners for Buncombe County. Those of you who have lived in Buncombe County for a long time might remember we went a few years back to a district-based form of the structure for the Board of Commissioners. So when placing an application to the county for grant funds, organizations are asked to select what geographic area and district you work in. Our Board of Commissioners is elected to serve districts. The chair is at large and serves the full county, and then we've got 2 commissioners serving each of the 3 districts, 1 which is central, 2 which is north and east, and 3 which is west and south. Our Board of Commissioners has directed funding in the past based on goals that are in the sustainability plan. So Buncombe County has a sustainability plan, which is sort of like our strategic plan, and lays out what kind of community we would like to have in the areas of community and economy and environment. But this year, the board articulated some strategic priorities that they want to focus on in addition to those things that are in the strategic plan. Those are affordable housing, diverse community workforce, early childhood education, justice resource support, opioid addiction, and renewable energy. We have issue briefs on each of these so you can look at the kinds of goals that they're thinking about within these areas, all available online. If you go to buncombecounty.org/commissioners, there's more information about those. I wrote down a website on the whiteboard, buncombecounty.org/community-investment. That's sort of a shortcut to get to the grants. You can learn about the strategic partnership grants and other grant programs that the county operates, like Isaac Coleman grants and Tipping Point grants. But to get the most information about these priorities, it would be going to the commissioner's website. I have my business cards here. If you have any questions or are looking for the information later and are not able to find it, just give me a call or shoot me an email and I'll help you do that.
Shot. So this is Asheville City Council. As you know, we are not districted as of as of yet. I will say that for the city, the process is a little bit different. It's a two-step process for funding to be recommended. The Housing and Community Development Committee is the first committee that sees these applications, and they review them, and then they make funding recommendations to the full council. The Housing and Community Development Committee with the new council, the chairperson is Julie Mayfield. The other two members are Shanika Smith and Keith Young. So those are the folks that you would want to be in contact with about this particular funding stream, any funding stream actually that we manage. The priorities for strategic partnership funds this year are listed here, and I will say we have guidance from the Housing and Community Development Committee that funding applications outside of these priorities will not be considered. That means that if you do not fit into one of these priorities, those applications will not be forwarded to council for their approval. It isn't a judgment on good work that happens outside of these priorities, but the fact that there is limited funds and these are the priorities that they want to focus those funds are this year. So the funding streams that we both have, right? We want to make it clear about what things are and what they aren't today. From our side, Community Development Block Grant and Home Investment Partnership Funds, those are federal funding streams. Those have different requirements than strategic partnership funds. If you are interested in CDBG or home, you can also talk to me about that, but that is not what we're talking about today. But those have far more specific requirements and restrictions because they are federal funds. Many of your agencies would not qualify to be able to use those funds because of those restrictions. That is what it is. We don't set those restrictions. Those come from the federal government. But if you have questions about your qualification for that, I can answer those questions. Strategic partnership funds, on the other hand, are general funds from the city budget. City council decides every year how much money will be allocated to strategic partnerships. This year, we have $240,000. It's not a lot of money. It's more money than we've ever had for this funding stream. That 240 likely will not roll forward into the next funding cycle. The next funding cycle will probably be 200. But right now they are budgeting and recommending in our budget process that's underway right now 240,000. Okay? You want to say more about?
Yeah, I do want to note, because that is one of the questions that I've received from partners already. Heather mentioned that the city will only consider applications that are aligned with these priorities. We have not gotten that directive from the county. So we did include the Buncombe County Sustainability Plan here because that has goals that might have projects and outcomes that are not part of these 6 strategic priorities. We know that the board wants to use these priorities as a guide to shape future investments, but they have not said that a project needs to fit with one of those. So if your better fit is something within the sustainability plan, that information is linked on our website and you can go through those goals. We encourage people to submit your applications based on where the best alignment is, as opposed to trying to make it fit within one of those 6. For Buncombe County, our spacing is a little funny on that. Our grant program, the strategic partnership funds were $1.2 million roughly last year, the fiscal year that we're in now. There were 36 grants awarded, ranging from the smallest grant of around $4,200 to the largest grant being $175,000. These grants cover a lot of territory, fund a lot of different kinds of projects. There are capital items, there are service-related items, there are projects that are environmental, projects that have customers and clients that they serve. Median grant amount is $21,000. We provide that as information, not as a guide. There's not a limit for Buncombe County of how much can be asked for, what can be requested, but this is helpful to kind of get a sense of what else has been funded by the Board of Commissioners through the strategic partnership grants in the past.
So here, the city's numbers, we had 15 grants awarded last year, and last year our total was 158.4. Our smallest grant is $3,500. The largest that we've made is 30, and everything in between. So that just like with the county, there is not a cap. Council does not put a cap on what you can ask, nor do they say the minimum of what they will fund. Keep in mind that funds are limited. And so if you're looking at your budgets and thinking about how you align with city priorities, be realistic about what your ask is. That matters, so that you, one, are not expecting more than is possible, and so that council sees that you are looking at the reality of what the total pot of money is and how you work with others for that money to be spent. I will say, in our current reality, we don't know exactly when these allocations are going to happen. The timeline that we have published for March, HCD may not do it that way. They told us last month, or this month, yeah, a couple weeks ago, that they're meeting that they may delay the strategic partnership funding allocation a month or so. CDBG and home, again, is different, and that's on a federal timeline. We can't change those dates in order to meet federal, I'm assuming the government's open, to meet those deadlines, but these funds, it may be later. The application date is not going to change. For those of you that have heard those conversations with HCD, we are going to stay to the application deadline so that we have materials ready for the committee whenever they do decide they want to make those decisions. So your deadlines will not change, but we do not know for sure when those allocations are going to take place.
Same is true for Buncombe County. Applications are due February 9th, same date. We don't know exactly what the application review process will look like this year. As staff, we always compile information and submit it up to the Board of Commissioners. In the past, people have been asked to come in and make in-person presentations in front of the Board of Commissioners. We're not sure if that will be a part of the process again this year. They've talked about potentially having a committee like the city does to review and make recommendations to the larger board. We haven't heard any final decisions on that. We know for sure applications are due February 9th. We know for sure decisions will be made by the time budget gets adopted. So those of you who have received Buncombe County grants in the past are accustomed to kind of that late timeline. Hearing from me in mid-June, we usually get our, in rare circumstances, we have budget adoption pushed into July, but the budget adoption happens in June, and then I have an email ready to go and contact organizations that following morning. So this is an opportunity for us to go through each of the grant questions.
Please be writing your questions down too.
Talk about what the intent was, answer any questions. Do we want to answer questions after we get through all of this?
Potentially. Does that sound like the most helpful to y'all? We go through this and then answer your questions after? Okay. So Rachel said a little bit about the area served. That's more for the county. You have to say which particular district. Remember that for city funds, your organization has to operate in the city limits of the county. That's statute, that city funds have to be spent within the city limits of the county. So that's the area, is the city footprint. And if you're unsure about what that means for you, if you serve, many of you serve people in the city and in the county, that's fine, as long as some of the people that you serve are in the city, that's perfectly okay. It just cannot be all expended outside of the city limits. So if you have more particular questions about that, you can ask me. Your organization description, we hope that this is not too big of a question, but a very direct one, so that as we translate information, that in this statement you can say what it is you do and why you do it, what the outcome is from that. The thing I want to say about strategic priority, I think is a drop down on ours. You have to pick, and you have to pick for yours too, right? So you have to pick your strategic priority. We love all of you very much, and we may have to move you because of the way that you classify yourself may not be the way that the city classifies what you do. So it's nothing personal, but we do have to make sure that your outcomes, if you pick a particular priority, that the outcomes that you're saying meet that priority. And if they don't, then we will move you to the one that we think it will tell you that. But we may need to do that. We've had to do that in the past. Want me to keep going? Okay. And so the question that I get the most, and I don't know if this is true for Rachel, is that from council is what exactly is the gap? What exactly is the need that your organization is addressing? And I mean to be very specific about that and provide information about why, right? Because we can list a number, I mean we could do all day, right, to list all the disparities that exist in our community and everywhere else. But what is the specific critical need? None of you are everything to everybody. What is the specific thing that your organization does that will improve XYZ. Does that make sense? We know that there are rippling effects, right? We know there are rippling effects to the work that all of you do. That's not what this question is about. This question is about the specific thing that your outcome is, right? So the work that Changing Together does has rippling effects for families, right? But that's not the specific thing that Changing Together does, right? You work with specific individuals for XYZ, right? We hope families get affected by that too, and that's not the specific need. There are other organizations serving the families in a different way than Changing Together is serving your families, right? Does that make sense? So the project, how will the project work? This is the part that we struggle with the most, particularly from those of you that have lower capacity and less staff to work on this, and we understand that, and so we would like to help you, particularly from our side, with this question. Our elected officials like to see benchmarks and milestones. That's how they classify data and say, oh, well, if my daddy taught me that it's going to do this many kids going to visit colleges, when is that going to happen, and then what happens after? Right? What happens to those kids that Keenan took to North Carolina Central? Right? So they really want to see that. And if you're struggling with how to write that, please talk to me or to Erica, and we're happy to help you do that. That's the thing that we, from the city side, have the biggest problem translating to our elected officials. We know what you do because we work with you all the time. So we get that, but we need to be able to show them on documents. The way that we have to translate information to elected officials is they all have to get exactly the same thing from us. So we don't have individual conversations with elected officials. That's not how that works. We have to give them the exact same information at the same time. Does that make sense? So the more that you can fall into what is sometimes hard, into a box about how you say those benchmarks, the more they're going to know about what you do compared to another organization or how it relates to another organization. Is there more that you would say about that, Erica? I know that's part of what. And then who will be served? Again, this is the specific demographic that you will be served, not the families affected by the people that you are working with, but the people that you are serving, the particular demographic. That could be race, that could be income, it could be age, it could be all of the above. But talk about that because we know that there's a lot of data out there about disparities in different demographic groups in our community, so talk about which ones you're working with. I lost my thing. Maybe Rachel has it. Did that work? Yep. I'm not the technical person, sorry. What other organizations are you working with? None of us work in silos, and we know that y'all are all connected, and a lot of what many of you do is on a continuum of things. So talk about that. Don't talk, it's not a bad thing. This is a good thing. Council wants to see how their, and I know the commissioners do too, wants to see how their funding is leveraged, really is what that's about. Like, if we're funding Changing Together, and we're funding Bountiful Cities, and we're funding My Community Matters, you know, how do those all work together? And what does that look like? Okay, so this is where you do talk more about the other how your households are served by other agencies. This is key for the city, who is responsible for the project, because we pay salaries for many of your people. We need to know what personnel looks like, and there are a number of reasons for that are just technical reasons, but we need to know who's responsible, that there's a point person, and that person is somebody that's qualified to do what they're doing. The measuring results is similar to the timeline and the benchmark question. So if you think about your benchmarks and your timeline and the key milestones and all of that, how are you going to measure those things when they happen? You know, what does it look like? And there's no formula for this. We do get asked, you know, well, can you give me a measurement? And it's so specific for program that it's hard for me to give you, this is what we want this to look like. But if you want 12 people to stay out of jail, how are you going to measure the success of that? Is it for 6 months? Is it for 12 months? You know, and how are you going to follow up? You know, so what is the measure that you are going to use, and how are you going to use it consistently? So that at the end of the grant year, when we ask you for your final narrative and your final numbers, we can show over that timeline, and this is what we're going to be doing when we forward this stuff to HCE this year. For those of you that are funded now, here's what happened, right? Here's the measurements, and here's what happened for the key milestones that folks said they were going to do. You don't always meet them. That's not bad, but we need to know why, right? So if you don't meet those measures, that's a reporting issue, but, you know, what does success look like? And, you know, if it doesn't become that, then we deal with it later. Yeah, Erica. This is a critical piece for always a critical piece for the council. They want to know that they aren't the only funder, that you are working with lots of other funders because they want to be in partnership with other people. So we need to know. We know that that often is to be determined because we're in budget cycles, right? And that you have requests into a number of people, and that may not be decided. But show us what it is. And it's on our budget sheet, right? Yeah. And then how will this project be maintained? I mean, that's the sustainability question about, beyond this $5,000 or this $10,000, what's your plan? What's your plan for this work to be sustainable and maintained throughout the life of the project? Anything you want to add?
I'm going to recommend that we take about 5 minutes for people to write some questions on the Post-it notes, and we'll go around and collect them. During that 5-minute break, if you have parked in the bank parking lot in one of the TD Bank spots, please move your car to another place because the bank is open on Saturdays. They're open till 1, and so parking there makes it difficult for their customers to get in and bank. So quick 5-minute break. Please write questions down on the Post-it notes, and we'll go through those together in a few minutes. All right, we're ready to begin.
If you can hear me, clap. Y'all know I used to be a pastor, right? I know all those tricks. All right. Y'all ready to hear some questions? And if these questions, I will say, if these questions spur other questions, we're happy to hear those too. And we don't have to wait for that. We'll go through them, and if the question we ask needs a follow-up question, this is the time to do it. I will also say our contact information is on this slide. Rachel and I both have business cards here as well, if you want to take that, that has our contact information. I know that we both would be happy to sit down, have a phone conversation, email, any of those things following this and prior to the deadline. The sign-in sheet, is it going around, Erica? All right, first question. For city funds, are there specific priorities for how funds are used, capital, program fees, etc.? The answer to that is no. These are general funds, and they're very flexible. The only restriction is we can't pay individuals, meaning that you can't buy gift cards, you can't pay program participant fees, you can't pay stipends to people that are participating in your program, okay? You can pay staff salaries to run your program, but you cannot pay the people that are participating in your program out of city funds. Makes sense? That difference makes sense? But gift cards, we can't buy gift cards either. Nobody can buy gift cards.
County funds are also general funds, so they're flexible. They can pay salaries, they can pay operating expenses. We were talking about rent versus insurance, those things that are sometimes hard to get funded from other funding sources that are more limited. This can cover administrative costs, operational costs, like I said, capital, so purchasing of things, upfits to buildings, and services. So it is among the most flexible funding that nonprofits receive, and among the most flexible funding that we oversee.
You also can't buy food, by the way, with city funds. No food. Does the county fund capital projects? Which I think you just answered. If so, what are some capital projects the county has funded in the past?
So capital projects, I had a conversation with one of the partners in the room this week about this. Not everything that comes in through this grant application ends up getting funded by the county through this grant project. So I'm thinking of Lee Walker Heights, that grant that application for county funding came through annual grant application process. Commissioners saw that, started having follow-up conversations, set that aside, and ended up building it into a different part of the budget. So the county has a lot of different tools available to provide funding. We do have a capital project that was funded this year through the grant application to a community center who is doing some repairs to their center, another organization to do some upfits to get internet access into the facility. We had another grant application that came in for a community center for a roof the need was so severe that we were able to work with the Board of Commissioners and identify another way to get it paid, so it didn't have to wait until the next fiscal year for that repair. So capital requests can come in, and the Board of Commissioners will consider if it's a good fit and if this grant program can help support that. And if not, there may be another option in the array or portfolio of resources that the county has.
Any follow-up to that? Can organizations be funded by both? Yes, and many of you are now. We expect that would continue if you're meeting the priorities and continue to do what the elected officials are wanting to fund. Again, our strategic priorities, and the reason that Rachel and I sat down and wanted to put this together more is that our strategic priorities have come more and more in line with each other. And so it's important for us to talk about that and to show elected officials how their joint work together is making an impact in the community. We're staff. We don't make any funding decisions. We don't even make recommendations in a particular way. We provide information. So those decisions about whether or not you're funded by both come from the elected officials. The additional part of this question is, will City of Asheville and Buncombe County grant staff be communicating about mutually funded organizations? And the answer to that is yes. One of the things that we have to provide, and I think this is true for Rachel too, that we have to provide to elected officials at their request is who else is funding you? Who else is in your budget? So they want to know that, so they will see that information.
A span on that question, I've been asked if it's a good thing or a bad thing to apply to both, and it's neither. I could see as an elected official saying, oh, well, the city is already funding this project and they've been funding it. Is that a good use of our resources for us also to fund the same project? Maybe better for us to kind of tailor and the city focus on this one and we'll focus on this one. I could also see an elected official saying, there's something really appealing about a city-county partnership on this one. What if we went in with equal or proportional investment into the same project, because the city is part of the county and this is based in the city but great impacts to the county, and so let's both fund it. The point of aligning our applications is to share information. So we'll make information available about what applications have come in. We did this last year, actually called Heather and said, one of the commissioners would like to see the list of what your applications are, and we were like, oh wow, there's a lot of the same names. So we don't know how far this will go. One of the things that we do at the county once a grant is awarded is turn that into a contract that establishes what the deliverables are going to be, what the expectations for the funds, how often will you report, how often will you submit those invoices or those draw requests. If we're both doing contracts, it might make sense to put the same deliverables in. We haven't talked about collaborating to that extent, but wouldn't that make sense to do the same type of report to be able to submit to two places rather than two different kinds of reports?
And we're open. I mean, that's ongoing conversation with staff because
right.
No
decisions on that, but that's the kind of brainstorming we've been doing with each other.
And the other part of this question is, will the funding decisions be joint-based? Not to our knowledge. They aren't joint-based decisions. Do you have to be a 501c3 nonprofit to apply? Yes, you do for the city. I don't know the answer to that for the county. Or at least you have to be in process of that happening for the city. If you submitted your paperwork and can show me that, then I will forward the application, but you do have to be in process.
This program is focused on nonprofits. Not every nonprofit is a 501c3. A nonprofit might be an association of churches. 501c6, I don't know that one. Is that what that one is? There are different kinds of nonprofit organizations. We have other groups. I think there's someone in here that has partnered with an umbrella, partnered kind of with a fiscal agent. So they've got a group that's smaller or more developed, on the kind of developing end of that life cycle of an organization, and so partnered with an umbrella that could receive those funds on their behalf. We do require some assurances once funding is provided, so that organizations are submitting to us things like certificates of general liability insurance, depending on what kind of work is occurring. We want to make sure that that liability, that indemnification is in place. We ask for things like financial statements, copies of tax filings, so that there's an assurance that the public funds are being used well. We have services and resources and support that we can make available to organizations that need assistance on that. But the county does have an open books policy, and so we request a fair amount of documentation when it comes time for the contracting part of the grant.
Sure. It is. We've done that. We are currently funding a couple of people like that, and that's fine. Yep. Right. Yes. Be clear. Make sure those applications are clear, but yes.
Yeah, I would say just to be clear, if the application came in under the name of the one that is the recipient as opposed to coming under the name of the fiscal sponsor, that's okay. Right. As long as we're clear when it comes down to the kind of the financial assurances piece, what organization is to be the recipient of those funds.
What is economic mobility? Economic mobility is a service, well, it's a term, right? But when you're thinking about a project, it would be a project that assisted an individual or household move from low income to higher income. That's a basic, that can mean a lot of things, but that's what the city means by economic mobility. We have really great wealth disparities in Asheville, as y'all are very well aware. And one of the priorities of the city around workforce development in our funds is to increase economic mobility in our low-income households and neighborhoods. In applying for a strategic partnership grant, are we applying to the city, county, or both at the same time? Both at the same time. There's still two different applications, but the questions are the same, basically. So you shouldn't have to do a ton of rewriting. That was our hope, unlike how you've done in the past. I'm sorry that I can't make our CDBG application that way as well, but it is as short and succinct as I can get it in order to transmit the information we have to have for HUD. So those of you that are doing both, my apologies. We don't enjoy reading them either at that length. You know, my greatest hope is that the Department of Housing and Urban Development one day understand the succinct and concise something. Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep. Are funds reimbursement based for both City of Asheville and Buncombe County? I don't understand that question. Is that what it means? Okay, so Rachel can answer from her side. So we are based on a reimbursement system, technically. If that is a hardship for your organization, then you can talk to me about that. And there are people in the room that can tell you that I am as flexible about that as I can be. So we can't, what I cannot do is expend the whole grant amount all at once. I can't do that up front. But we can work on percentages to help build to where you can get to reimbursable. Does that make sense?
The county starts from a place of being reimbursement based. Typically what we offer as a starting place is quarterly drawdown. So at the end of the quarter, within that first couple of weeks after a quarter ends, organizations submit an invoice for what's been spent that quarter. However, we understand that cash flow is tough for a lot of organizations, and I can't think of an example of when an organization came back to us with a request to accommodate that we were not able to accommodate that. So we start there for kind of a uniformity purpose. But if an organization says, you know what, twice a year would work better for us, or a different time within the quarter rather than waiting for the end of the quarter, or could the first time we get at the beginning and the other times, we're open and we're flexible. The main thing is that we do require organizations to turn in a listing of those grant-related expenses, the tracking for that public funds purpose.
So the additional part of that question was, what is fund disbursement protocol? And so that, I think Rachel spoke a little bit to that. Timeline, most strategic partnership funds are quarterly for us for drawdowns as well. Timeline-wise, because these are general funds for us, we get contracts out for these in July, because once our fiscal year once our budget is approved and our new fiscal year begins, then we can contract these funds. I will say, and Erica will back me up on this, our biggest hangup in getting you paid is you getting your contract back to us. Because what I can't do is disperse funds if I don't have a signed contract, right? That's not legal. We can't pay expenses with no legal agreement. So when we send, and Megan will do that, she will send you your contract and your scope of work and all of that, and you have to sign it and get it back to us. We often get draw requests before we have a contract, because you haven't gotten your contract back to us. So there is onus on you as an organization to get your contract back to us, because as soon as you do that, then we can get that process started. But we can't sign that for you. So you have to do that part in order for us to be able to pay. Same. Does it have to be project specific? Yes. There has to be a clear project, and there have to be clear measurements and deliverables. What do you want to say about that?
And we'll work with organizations to help identify what that looks like.
Yes.
So we were talking about a community center. Is a community center a project? I think a community center can be a project. Let's talk about what purpose it serves.
Right.
Who is coming to that center for what kinds of things? Are they coming for recreation? Are they coming to get food? Are they coming for the community connection and the educational meetings that happen there? So it is based on sort of, we use project language, but don't be intimidated. If you'd like help talking through what you do and how it ties to a project, just reach out.
So the best example I can give of that is I had a request one time, well, can you pay a portion of our executive director's salary? And I said, well, sure, but not just because I like her and I think she's amazing. You know, what is the point of paying part of your ED's salary, right? You know, what's the outcome of that? Would utilities be considered part of a project? Yes. If it's a housing project, if it's serving low-income people, yes. Those are legitimate expenses. How is city funding spread across priorities? It's an interesting question that has fluctuated wildly sometimes from year to year. Our current funding for this current fiscal year is heavily weighted toward youth services and achievement gap projects, and that came from the last HCD committee and their priorities around that. I don't have any idea if that's how this current HCD committee, and we have two new members on a committee, changes the dynamic completely about what priorities are. You need to, so know that. We had the same HCD committee for a while, and we don't anymore. And so staff, we don't know how they're going to do this. It's going to take me a year to read the new committee and get a better sense of where their priorities are going to be. So that could go completely the other direction, and they're going to focus on something else this year. I don't know the answer to that. And they don't have a formula for it. It's going to come down to where they are when they come to make the funding decisions. And yours is wildly diverse as well, correct?
Right. We don't, unlike the city, the county's Board of Commissioners has not set an amount that they plan to grant. They're going to see what kind of grant applications come in, and then meet and review, and then as part of their budgeting process, negotiate or come to agreement on what a total amount would be that they're going to fund as part of these grants. And of course, as part of that, how it's distributed among the priorities.
Right. Any specific items past grantees should keep in mind for this funding cycle? Not that I can think of, other than to know that they will look at what you're doing now and see what they will ask. One of the questions that when we forward our staff cover sheet is what you're doing is a question about if they are currently funded. I mean, what's happening? You know, what are the outcomes? So they want to know what you're doing now, and that's part of why many of you, those of you that are working with Erica right now, have been contacted by Erica because we've been asked very specific questions around youth services and achievement gap and all of those things, and so they want a lot of information about where their funds are going and what kind of impact they're having. So we're trying to collect that information as best we can, so that our officials have the information that they're requesting from us, from you. Our
County Board of Commissioners is very interested in performance and performance outcomes. We produce a report for them quarterly, so that's part of why we start everyone on that quarterly cycle. Even if we change the financial reporting, we still always have quarterly outcomes. We gather from those reports that come in some highlight or headline indicator kind of information and put it into a roll-up report that commissioners get in their email, and we post online once every 3 months showing a target. This is where we thought we were going to go. How many, it could be how many, how much kinds of things, how many people would be served, and how it's tracking toward that target, and to what extent we can, we try to put outcomes. So the so what part of it, not just how much or how many, but what difference did it make? I'm talking in really general words because remember we said that some projects are capital, some are going to be environmental, some are around community outcomes like achievement gap or mentoring or education or early childhood education. So it looks different from organization to organization. That's one of the things that staff can do and will do once grants are awarded, is work with each of the funded groups to identify a few things that we can set a target on and measure throughout the year as to how we're doing.
To go on that a little bit further, there's a very big difference between an output and an outcome, right? You can tell us how many people you're going to serve, and that's important. Even more important is what happens to the people that you serve, right? Council wants to know what happens to the people that you serve. They're glad you're serving lots of people, but that's not the question that they're asking us. They're asking what the impact of your service to those folks is. That's the outcome. Does that make sense? So, you know, checking the box of, well, we did all this and we served all these people, that's not enough. We need to know that you serving all of those people did something, and what is the thing that it did, or things, right? Because we can all serve lots of people all day long and nothing changes for them. And so Amy's question was, is there a minimum number of program participants requirement? And the answer is no. It's more about impact than numbers. And I think that's definitely been a shift, I would say, in the nonprofit world in the 20 years that I've been in and out of this kind of stuff, is we used to be really concerned about the number of people that we served, and that was how we measured success. But, you know, how many people think that has worked? Right? Our disparities are worse than they've ever been, and so we need to be thinking more about impact. If the impact is 5 people and XYZ happens, then the ripple effect of that is greater than if we serve 25, that nothing changed. I always recommend that people meet with their council members. We don't, and again, to be clear, staff does not. We do not interact. The way, when you see us interact with council, that's when we interact with council. We don't have conversations with council. We're not allowed to do that. So what you hear us say to HCD and to council when we're in chamber, that's our interaction with them. Okay, so I always encourage you to talk to them because we are limited in what we can transmit to them based on the questions they ask us in public.
I would echo that. It's always beneficial to have a relationship with the elected official that serves the district that you're working in. All Buncombe County grants are decided on by all Buncombe County commissioners. If you're working in a certain area of the county, that might be something that the elected official that's focusing on that district might be especially interested in, but all commissioners do serve the whole community. So Reverend Ray's question, I'm repeating it for anyone who might not have heard it, but also for the for filming from the microphone, is to what extent are we looking for collaboration, for partnerships, for groups to be working together? And I would say that that's seen favorably. There's a place in the application to talk about those collaborative relationships. We don't want to see services being duplicated or silos, competing, like you mentioned. We do not at the county require collaborative applications. If there's a set of organizations that has a project and they're working together on it, we would happily receive a collaborative application. So it's not required as part of the structure of how applications come in, but we do want to see collaboration and partnerships spoken to as part of the application.
I would echo all of that. Additionally, I would say that our HCD committee chair is very interested in collaborative work and really wants to see that, and those of you that are familiar with her know that she stresses that. We're also very aware that doing the same type of service doesn't necessarily mean duplication. We know that. We know that the need is great and vast for most of what y'all do. So when we talk about collaboration, it's not just a matter of saying we're not duplicating services. You need to say more than that. Talk about how your services work together to serve the people that you're serving. Does that make sense? I wish there was a way to make it not competitive. With limited funds, that's really hard to do. Somebody's going to lose. I will say, for example, last year we had almost $500,000 in requests, and council had a budget of $158,000. So lots of people lose. That's the reality. I don't anticipate that ask being any less this year, and probably more. And actually, in my time at the city, that has grown every year. And I think, some of that is about the sophistication of organizations doing more work, and that's a good thing. Our revenues in that same period of time, based on a variety of things, have decreased, right? So it's an interesting spot to be in.
I want to call on Marcia in a second, but to echo that, I had an opportunity to get to know new people who were new to me and organizations that were new to me over the past year through the Isaac Coleman Economic Community Investment Projects and through Tipping Point grants. And what I heard in a lot of cases was the county funds nonprofits every year. I didn't even know. And so we have in the past been a little more on the down low about the grant application. You kind of had to know which website to look at and when to look at it to know there was a grant application open. We have been intentionally more inclusive, putting more people on our email lists, having the grant writing workshop, letting the city folks know about the county process and the county folks know about the city process. We anticipate that we'll have more applications this year than we have in the past. And that is a challenge for the decision makers, but do want to acknowledge that.
How many people got to be part of that fun meeting with me last year? Yep. It's a good question, Marcia. A challenging one for me to answer politically. What I do know is that the individuals that perhaps spoke, the elected officials that perhaps spoke in ways that were inappropriate have publicly apologized for that in a number of ways. And I have seen shifts in the way that they are asking us questions and the way that they are looking at applications because of that experience. I think that we will not see a repeat of that because of that. One of the things that I appreciate most about Asheville and our elected officials on the city side is their ability to admit that they're wrong, and we have seen that happen. We at the staff level have seen behavior change because of that. I can't speak for how that's been in the community, and I'm not going to try. But we have seen that on a staff level in the way that we have been asked for information, and that's a good thing. Collaboration is not a requirement, not for strategic partnership funds. I will say for some of our community development block grant funding, it is for different projects that HCD has asked for that because of the way those projects are doing economic development. So that's a different thing. It's not required, and I think there's better understanding now about what a continuum of service looks like, if that makes sense, that requires multiple agencies to achieve the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. I can't speak for the elected officials themselves, but I'm hopeful that we will not have a repeat of that really interesting day. Yeah, Jen. Yes, to both. Yes, to both. There are organizations that have benefited from strategic partnership funds. I know this is true from the county side too, for decades, many, many years. That is simply true. There are also, from the city side, new organizations that get funded every year. There are agencies that had been funded for years that are no longer funded. Again, it is entirely on the city side about the priorities of the HCD committee. Council does not, the process in the city where, so the process is the HCD committee will make their funding recommendations. We then move that to council, and so I would then stand in front of council and say, here's the Housing and Community Development Committee's recommendations for funding, and then council says yay or nay to that. They do not generally go against the HCD committee recommendations, but sometimes they do. So clear as mud about what's going to happen, right? welcome to my daily life. And we don't, yeah, Dewana.
So the question is, if an organization or project receives funding from the county through another funding source, would that impact the funding that they could potentially receive from this strategic partnership grant? And I think the answer is it could potentially have an impact. We do gather information and provide that to the Board of Commissioners as part of their review process. And one of the things that we've looked at in the past is what are their funding do they receive? Do they have a contract with any of our departments? Does the social work department provide funding to this organization to support some of their services for their clients? Does the city also fund them? Do they get funded from other sources? Not that it's a negative or a positive, but just to have that information so that they can look at all of the options. So if it's the same project that's coming into two different grant sources, being really clear to explain how those two different grants would pair together to fund the same work. If it's separate, just being really clear in the application to show that while it might be the same operating organization, these projects have different clients or different outcomes and are different in a way that would lead for them to be considered differently. So, good question, Dewana. Thank you.
And I would echo that from the city's side too. Any other questions? I do need to talk about logistics for our application for a second. Okay, so for the city application, and this is true for any funding stream that's coming through community development, you have to watch a webinar in order to access the application. There is no workaround, period. You have to watch the webinar, and if you have not done that, you cannot get to the application. The application is tied to your username that you use to watch the webinar. So if you are watching it and you're not the one who's doing the grant application, then the person who's doing the grant application also needs to watch the webinar. There's no workaround. It's not long. It's not long, but we think it's important for you all to have the same information about the application, and which is why we've moved to that. So there's consistent information out there that you can access. That doesn't mean that we won't answer questions or any of that. And Megan Gaskell, who's our amazing administrative assistant for community development, her email is up there as well. She is the technical question. Neither Eric or I have any idea how to tell you to work in the application. That's not where our skill sets are. But Megan can problem solve that with you. So if you are trying to access the application and you're having trouble with anything around the technical side, Megan is the person that you want to talk to. And if you're having trouble accessing the webinar, Megan is also the person that you want to talk to. You're welcome to ask me that question. I'm going to forward it to Megan, because I don't know. I can't be backup on everything, so I actually am not trying to know. Any questions about that from the city? It is, but I would email Megan and she can send you the link rather than trying to write down all that. Unless you just want to try to find all those links together, Keenan. I don't think y'all have watched it yet, so I think you guys do need to. I don't think you're on the list. And we know who's watched it, right? It generates a list. I don't pretend to understand how any of that happens, but I get a list of who's watched it.
To apply for Buncombe County grant funds, we do use an online software. So the starting place is the website address that's written on that whiteboard, buncombecounty.org/community-investment. If you had it bookmarked last year and you had community-funding, that still works. We're just trying to use a more inclusive way to talk about the grant. So you land there, click on strategic partnerships, you can learn about that, and when you get to the apply place, it will take you to a third-party website. If you've applied with us before, you might have bookmarked that online grant application software. If you apply to the Community Foundation or United Way, some of the other funders in the area, when you're in that grant software, it's going to look and feel similar. It's the county's own version of it, but hopefully navigating in it feels familiar. We got together with some of the regional funders in the area and all agreed to use the same online grant platform. So starting at buncombecounty.org/community-investment gets you to the county application. There's no webinar required.